Hello and welcome to episode 100 of my Zelda Let's Play. You'll notice we're approaching Koholint Island, and that'll give you a clue as to where we're going first on our grand tour of all the Zelda games. Watch out for the cutscene coming up next. Yes, that's right. Today we're playing Link's Awakening. This is the 2019 re-release on the Switch. The original game was on the GameBoy, which had a square screen, and the Switch has got a wide screen. So they recreated the game as faithfully as possible in this wonderful little toy world, dream world style. But the dimensions are all the same, so you end up with all this kind of wasted space whenever you're in a square room indoors like this, which is fine and I get it. One of the biggest additions to the game is the chamber dungeons. This allows the player to build their own dungeons. Originally they were going to do a Super Mario Maker style level editor where you could place individual doors, locks, baddies, switches and all that. But first it had already been done, second that would be a whole lot more work. It'd be a standalone game by itself just doing that. So they reduced it down to you playing individual chambers. And you could place them in any order you like as long as doors went somewhere. You could have a key to unlock something, and there had to be a final boss to finish the level off. The thing in Link's Awakening is it was the first time you had this kind of side-scrolling view, so in order to make it fun, it was the first time Link was able to jump. He needs a device called the Rock's Feather to do that. I'm not really sure how this works in the chamber dungeon when you're planning it all out. But it seems to work very well. You can't share these online like you could with Super Mario Maker. You need to use an Amiibo NFC device, touch your thing and it'll add it to that, and then you can touch it to somebody else's Switch and it'll transfer it over. In these outdoor areas, if you look around the outside edge of the screen, you'll see it's a little bit blurry, and that kind of reinforces the whole dreamlike world thing that you have in the game. Which it is ultimately, sorry if that's a spoiler to you. And it kind of compensates for the transition from a square screen to a wide screen very nicely. So every individual object and every individual tile is placed exactly where it was in the original game. It's very, very faithful. You notice the chain chomp we just walked past. He's not a Zelda character per se, he's just a Nintendo asset that appears in other games. That gives you a clue as to the early development of the game. It was an experiment. They weren't told to go and make this for the Game Boy. They were told to go home and go to bed. This is something they were doing in their spare time. So rather than create new characters or work a lot on the dialogue, they just threw things together and see what worked. That's why you've got NPCs who give you tutorial instructions and say, but I've no idea what that means. But it's fine because it's a fun game. And it's a dream. Because it's a portable game, it was the first portable adventure game of this type. You might dip in and out of it over a period of weeks or months. So they added a character who drops in from time to time and gives you hints. Now, you might forget them or whatever. So they also made a thing with the map where you could go back to that square of the map and read any important hints, and that'd keep you in the know about what the main quest is, what you need to do next. Sometimes these clues were a bit obscure and hard to understand. It took absolutely ages to finish it, but it was very satisfying when you did. Power-ups. Yeah, I was never a fan of these because I like the main soundtrack to the game and it overrides the soundtrack when that happens. And dungeons like this one, you can only access them in a certain order and you need a special key to get in each one. This is the first one, Tail Cave. Let's have a look what's inside, shall we? Next up we'll look at the original game, and I mean the original game, and I am old enough that the original game is actually in black and white. It didn't even look this good. On the original Game Boy it was kind of a hazy green, you could barely see it, especially if the light in the room was not great because it wasn't backlit. That technology didn't come on for ages. So, despite having a very poor picture, this game sold about 4 million copies over the space of 11 years if you count the re-release. Most cars aren't that popular. It was astonishingly popular. The idea that you could carry this little handheld adventure in your game that you could dip in and out of as and when you pleased and spend as much time as you like, as long as you had battery, which was actually a good selling point for the Game Boy because its batteries really lasted. It didn't use that much power. It was only an 8-bit console with no colour and no light. So, yeah, it was amazing. And very novel at the time and very popular. A lot of people's first ever experience with a Zelda game. And a lot of people go back to play it again and again because it's just got a lot of replayment value. Like I said before, the amount of times I've completely forgotten what I'm supposed to do next and use the help system to find my way and still fail. It just keeps pulling you back in. It's weird. So yeah, anyway, like I said before, it was a technical exercise by the people working at Nintendo in the spare time. There were like 2 or 3 people working on it, and they just wanted to see if they could port the SNES game, Link to the Past, onto the Game Boy. Now the SNES is a much more powerful console, and they were doing really well. It was looking really quite swish. And then Nintendo found out about it and said, you know what? Make a whole new game, whole new story. You can have a bit more license with it, and they came up with this dream world idea. So that's where you get things like characters breaking the fourth wall and talking to the player, and characters from other games being imported, like the Chomp that we saw earlier. Also, that was part of the "can we do this" attitude they had to start with. They just used whatever sprites that they had readily made and they could animate. So this is a Zelda game that completely does not feature Zelda whatsoever in any way, shape or form. She doesn't even appear in a dream, although it's implied that Link is thinking about her from time to time. Yes, I think I can remember in the opening conversation with is it Marin? The lady who rescues you on the beach. He mistakes her for Zelda, and she's like, "Who's Zelda?" So I think that's the only mention of her in the whole game. And yet the game's still called Legend of Zelda. Anyway, so there's no Hyrule either, and there's no lore to worry about. So they could get away with anything, including the most notorious way to end any story, which is by saying, "Oh, by the way, it was all a dream." But when you reach the end, the game begs you for its life. It's an absolutely haunting experience. And because it was so popular, when the Game Boy Color was launched, they re-released it in full colour, as you can see. Well, full colour. And that was the biggest criticism, like I said. The original picture was very flaky, and you couldn't see it terribly clearly. I mean, after a while, the Game Boy screen itself starts to die off. Mine, you can only see about the middle 3/4 of it, and even that's not great. So this is the version you get if you go on the Virtual Console on the Switch and you can see the Game Boy section. This is one of the games. This game gets re-released so many times I've lost count. When the 3DS came out, it didn't do as well as it should have, but I'd already bought it, and Nintendo, A, they wanted to thank you for your enthusiasm, and B, try to encourage you to show other people that the console wasn't as bad as they thought it was. It was a thing anyway. But they gave me a copy of this game, and a handful of others. Metroid Fusion. All very popular games, but they're very proud of it, and rightly so. So I started replaying it, and then in 2019 they re-released it on the Switch, and I had just finished playing it, even though I had just finished the story and they hadn't actually changed the story at all in the Switch port. I still found it very engaging to play Link's Awakening through again from the start, having just finished it, because there's so much you've got to figure out for yourself and remember, because it's not very direct, the storyline. It's very convoluted. The clues are there. I mean, you can go online and get a guide if you like, but that kind of takes the fun out of it for me. So there are a few additions to the game. The fishing thing, that was in the game to start with. This is the first Zelda game with a fishing minigame in it. Personally, I despise fishing. I hate everything about it, including the fish. But this fishing minigame was quite compelling. The instructions are quite straightforward. There's not a lot you have to do. I mean, you only had 4 buttons to start with. But just catching these 5 fish over and over again and making money whilst you're doing it is surprisingly compelling, because you do occasionally lose them. I got very close to losing that one just there. There were a couple of other things that were new. In the colour game, they added a whole extra dungeon onto the game that you could play after you finished the main quest, and that was based entirely on colour-based puzzles. So when the Game Boy Color was finally coming to the end of its life, they released another Zelda game, well, a pair of Zelda games, and these were Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Time. And once again, they were very popular, 4 million copies, won awards, got perfect scores in some reviews, and yeah, it was a fantastic pair of games. You didn't have to own both. You could play each game by itself, but there was a little bit of extra stuff that happened if you happened to have 2, but you'd have to have 2 Game Boys as well in order to make them work, or you saved the password from one. I never actually finished the entire pair of games. But it was going to be 3. When they were looking at early development, they were going to make it a Triforce trilogy, the game for courage, power and wisdom, the different elements of the Triforce. But it was getting a bit too complicated, so they had to scale it back. It's mainly to do with getting the 3 games to communicate with each other and give unique bonuses to the player. So yeah, it was released on the Game Boy console, Game Boy Color console, and it was so far behind its original launch date, they even threw in a little bit of stuff for the Game Boy Advance, which was released, I think, a month after this came out. So there's like a little shop you can go into that says, hey, do you like Game Boy Advance? Here's some bonus stuff for you because of Game Boy Advance. And if you played it in a Game Boy Advance, you got some even more bonus stuff, because the Game Boy Advance had backwards compatibility. So this really stretched the limit of what the Game Boy Color could do, and they added even more features. So you could have mounts, like you could ride well, not a horse, but I think it was a bear with wings and a kangaroo. It was amazing. And they had this whole thing with seeds that you could plant, wait for the seasons to change, or change them yourself, and then something had come out and it'd be a ring that gave you a special power. My favourite was the one that turned you into a like, and you could just wander around as a like. I don't know why, it just tickled me. So, seasons and time. In seasons you could change the seasons, and as you progress through the game you could change to each season in turn, and that unlocked new areas of the map. The map was about the same size as the Link's Awakening one, but there were 4 maps, one for each season. So many things changed, like you'd have snowdrifts and loads of autumn leaves and all sorts. And yeah, it had a few little winks to the original game, like this dungeon here looks exactly like the first dungeon in the first game. Speaking of, here it is. The original 1987 on the Famicom, but 1988 on the NES, Legend of Zelda. It was the first time I'd ever played a game where you could save your game, switch the console off, come back, and then carry on where you'd left off, which was groundbreaking at the time because I had a Mega Drive with Sonic on it. When you switched that off, you went right back to level 1, which is annoying. So, early development of this game, you started with the sword, but they got rid of that, and then you had the "it's dangerous to go alone, take this man," and that encouraged players to speak to characters in the game, which ultimately led to the development of all things Animal Crossing, where you have to talk to people all the time to get things. So this is the dungeon music you're hearing, but the main overworld theme that appears in every Zelda game since was originally going to be Bolero. Think Torval and Dean, the ice skaters, but the copyright on that hadn't expired, so they had to come up with something new. One day later they came up with the Zelda theme, and it's been there ever since. Amazing. The Famicom console had a microphone built into the control pad, which I think they had that on the Nintendo DS, or maybe one of the 3DS, one of the later ones. And you could blow into it and that would affect certain enemies. The Pole's voice, that kind of rabbit thing with, well, rabbit ears and no other rabbit-like features. So the creator of this, Shigeru Miyamoto, wanted to recreate his experience exploring the forest, caves and lakes in Kyoto, and throw in a bit of European medieval history. Well, sort of. So it's nice that you still get that kind of thing in the modern games, like Breath of the Wild. You're constantly exploring the open plains and forests of the world. This game had 2 play modes, so this is the original play mode, and if you defeat it, you get a much harder mode, which is a fairly common feature in a lot of games, mainly in all of the current Zelda games. There's another talking person. Gives you a tip in the game. He doesn't give you much else though, and don't hurt him or you'll be set on fire like I was. So the other way to get that is to type Zelda as your name in all capitals, and it unlocks a whole new game really, which is, considering this cost what would be about, I think, 120 quid in today's money for the game, that you got your money's worth out of it at long last. You can go to some dungeons from the start of the game, like this one you can just walk straight into. And inevitably I walked straight into Zelda 2, widely regarded as the most difficult Zelda game ever made, and that includes to this very day, and the harder modes on other existing Zelda games. As you can see here, I'm in a cave and I can't see a damn thing, and I've already died. I've been playing for a few seconds. Oh, and by the way, you have lives in this game, and this is the closest to a true RPG game that Zelda has ever made, because you've got experience points and you spend them. I'm dead again. And there you go, Ganon is back. I've already lost so badly. Hate it. It's so frustrating. If you do actually make some progress and you don't manage to die outright, oh, there's Zelda having a nap, your XP, if it levels up an area like damage, attack or magic powder, if it levels it up, that's fine, that saves. Save your game, that'll still be there when you switch console off and back on again. If you gain, say, 7 out of 8 XP required to go up, that XP vanishes when you switch off the game, so that progress is lost. And not only that, whatever your lowest progression is out of HP, magic or damage, that is the highest of all of your progressions that will be saved. That is difficult to understand, but it's really annoying once you work out that's what the game's doing. I think that was only in the Japanese version. It was a bit more forgiving on the other versions. Oh, I'm dead again. And it gives me a bleeding seizure every time I watch it. Nope, not going in there. Dear me. So yeah, it's just so frustrating. It was a bit more forgiving in the UK version, but it doesn't surprise me that it was somehow harder. Oh, you get a fairy sometimes. That's nice. That's nice. You'll recognise a lot of place names and things in this game that are place names of locations on the map in Breath of the Wild, because there's a lot more NPCs in this game than previous games, so they had to give lots of names to people, and they disappear for years and then reappear in Breath of the Wild. What else? Oh, this is the first game to feature Shadow Link. You see him in Ocarina of Time, and he's an iconic boss battle because it's in such a peculiar setting. It's like this mirror pond thing, and it just stuck with a lot of players as being a very high point of the series. Oh, this part is just never-ending fireballs being lobbed at me. Thanks, game. Yeah. Oh, I can defeat them. Fantastic. Not that it got me anything. Anyway. And here we are, right in the middle of my comfort zone, playing Link to the Past. I remember begging my dad to get me the SNES so I could play this game, and he did get it for me, and it was the best Christmas ever. When they were first developing it, they set out to make another NES game, but they had such a big budget because the previous games had done so well, it ended up taking 3 or 4 years to make, and they made it on the SNES instead. So the SNES was released worldwide, and you had the Super Famicom in Japan, and the Super Famicom had all kinds of attachment, including something that connected it to a broadcast system, like an internet, but a bit pre the internet. And for a very limited period, you could play an online version of this game with extra quests, and you actually had like somebody reading off a script, broadcasting a live dialogue, and all of that has been lost a long time ago because there wasn't any way to capture it at the time, and it just was gone. But there are some rare examples of the game recreated out there on the internet if you're willing to look for it. So the SNES was a 16-bit console, and it was quickly being overtaken by 32-bit consoles, but it was so well built and so well crafted, and it had so much capability that it lasted an awful lot longer than anybody else thought it would, and it could carry on with what it had. So this game was originally going to be called Triforce of the Gods, but the US US censorship guidelines, whatever you want to call them, weren't keen on anything containing the word God, so Link to the Past. And it introduces a few new concepts. So we've got the Master Sword makes its first appearance, and you've got the light and dark worlds. So about halfway through the game you think you're about to finish the game. No, it's a whole new world, and the game more than doubles in size. They did a lot of very clever memory tricks to get 2 entire worlds into one. So the physical world that you can interact with, all the hard surfaces and walls and staircases and doors and things, they're one fixed element in the whole game, and it just applies a different tile set. It saves a massive amount of memory, even though this had the bigger memory cartridge capacity. Somebody won a competition for a Final Fantasy game, and they got added to this game, and you can still find it in certain versions. I know it's on the Switch version, but I've never met the guy. It's a very secret place, and you'd be proud if you ever found it. Fast forward 9 years later, and you've got Ocarina of Time coming out on the Nintendo 64. First time Zelda was in 3D graphics. It had a dynamic real-time day feature, so time would pass at a continuous rate in some areas, and in other areas like this market here, it was paused depending on what time you arrived, so it would be day or night, nothing in between. Introduced the Gorons for the first time. The titular ocarina, it's kind of like a flute thing, You could play it using the buttons on the keypad rather than actually blowing into something, which I found horrible in other games. And it had magic powers, like it could unlock certain areas, it could change the time of day, affect the weather, and it caused certain Gorons to dance. In order to make the 3D experience accessible, they introduced a target lock mechanism that allowed you to focus on characters or enemies and rotate your character around them. And that became pretty much a standard feature in almost every 3D game since. And they also introduced context-sensitive buttons, like the A button would make you climb or push depending on where you were stood. And again, that's something that appears time and time again in games after this. The trading system's back. You have to trade items to get a better item or a worse item and lose money on it and then get angry. But ultimately you get something good. I think a really powerful sword or a fancy mask that lets you go faster. First time you can ride a horse, Epona. You can travel through time using the Master Sword. Now, originally the game was going to play all the way through as adult Link. So this part where you're young Link was added later, and that's where they thought, you know what, it's going to have to be third person, otherwise there's no point creating an adult and a child version. So it was going to be first person, so you'd be in the perspective of holding your sword and shield and walking around the world like that. What next? It was the largest game ever made by Nintendo, and one of the things that they did was they used, real-time cutscenes. So the animated characters and stuff, that was all created by the in-game engine as you see it, rather than a pre-rendered scene, which you still get in some games to this day. Oh yeah, it also used motion capture, a very early system of motion capture. They'd basically watch a video and place the vertices of their models in places over it. It wasn't like you had with Gollum in Lord of the Rings. It nearly had the same kind of level system that Mario 64 had, with the portraits and the portals and things. That's why the Forest Temple boss fight was the way it was. Oh, and they ported it to the 3DS and upgraded it, and they made the Water Temple easier, which I find insulting because that was an insufferable level. Ah, you've met with a terrible fate, haven't you? Yes, that's right, we're in Majora's Mask, and this time we follow Link, who has been cursed and turned into a Deku Scrub and ended up in the land of Terminia. We're in Clocktown here, the capital city, and Link is trying to track down his old fairy, Navi. That is not Navi, that is a slightly yellow fairy called Tail, and the biggest problem with this world is it's about to be crushed by the moon! You've got 3 days. Time is not stopping. Time is marching ever forward in this game, and it is utterly terrifying. This game gave me anxiety for years. So anyway, the Happy Mask guy. He wants to get the Majora's Mask, the titular Majora's Mask as it were, back from the Skull Kid. The Skull Kids were present in Ocarina of Time in the Lost Woods, and this one got hold of something far too powerful, and it can do all kinds of crazy things. At first he used it for fun little tricks and what have you, and then he used it to destroy everything everywhere. It's absolutely terrifying, and you come into the game slightly too late. You've only got 3 days, and nothing you have can possibly face off against this guy. So luckily you've still got the Ocarina of Time. You see? There are my items. So that, this time, not like using the Master Sword, you don't have that. That will allow you to travel back in time. It will also allow you to slow down the rate of time and jump forward to the next significant moment. Yeah, there you are. It's just like a constant weight bearing down on you. The whole game deals with all kinds of light-hearted topics like death, Armageddon and the afterlife. Just what a kid wants from a game. Still gives me nightmares. Oh, and the masks in this game, or at least a handful of them, let you turn into other creatures. Like a Goron, who can do this whole spinny thing and big old spikes come out of him. Yep, there you go. And immediately crash. And he's just like an unstoppable ball of destruction. It's so much fun being the Goron. You can be the Deku Kid, and his special power is shooting bubbles. And you can be a Zora, who, not surprisingly, very good at swimming. I forget what the other one was. There's Fierce Deity Link. He was amazing. He's like the most powerful version of Link there has ever been. He can pretty much one-shot everybody in the game, including bosses. And that brings us swiftly on to the antithesis of Majora's Mask, the very next game in the series, released for the GameCube. Originally, this is the Wii U version. It's been improved slightly here and there. This is the Wind Waker. Cartoon-like, very bright, very upbeat, using cel-shaded graphics. That's how you get this kind of cartoony effect. In the original trailer, it showed Link battling Ganon in a kind of high-definition, photorealistic kind of graphics, at least as good as the GameCube could accomplish back then. And people were like, wow, that looks cool. And then they released a trailer that looked like this, and they were like, what the hell happened? And it didn't do nearly as well as the Ocarina of Time, but it's retrospectively still a very good game, and it scored very well with all the critics. Also, Koroks appeared, and they were much less annoying in this game. The Koroks are descended from the Kokori children in Ocarina of Time, if you can believe that. They used to be people, now they're little wooden things with hilarious faces. So the original game, the original Wind Waker, had this whole take photos of things and we'll make a figurine for you. And it was incredibly difficult to do because you couldn't start it properly until you'd nearly finished the game, which is very annoying. Because some NPCs you could only encounter once in the entire game. So they fixed that slightly in this, and well, I've been busy, as you can see. This is my save file I created way back when, and it's still got all these things. Look at them all. It took ages to take some of these. I mean, this one was really hard work because you only see the King of Hyrule once. He's actually a boat now. Power of the Triforce, what can I say? So, why'd they go for this toony style after doing Majora's Mask? Probably depression. Something to cheer them up. So they were doing like doodles, and they doodled the Toon Link and the Toon Moblin, and people were like, let's go with that. And they had this all inspired idea for a story about what happened to Hyrule after it was drowned under the sea, and what did the people do and how did they cope. Oh, and they added a selfie mode to the Wii U version, which was fun. And there was a whole like internet sharing thing where you could share your pictures, and it was quite hilarious what people on there. The combat was fun. You had this parry move you could use on pretty much everything. Sometimes I actually got it right. Just 1 year later, and we see Toon Link reappear on the Game Boy Advance in the Minish cap. It's another top-down view, but this time again you've got Toon Link, and it's more like Link's Awakening in terms of its graphical style. It's a bit brighter and more upbeat, and it features things from the more recent games. This is one of my all-time favourite games because I've replayed it so many times. It's just its portability. I know there are other portable games, and there's the Switch and the more modern ones which are very high graphics, but I feel like they deserve a full screen, so this was a nice little pocket thing to have. It's the first game to explain why you have that weird pointy green cap. In this case, it's a bird and a wizard. It's a fantasy game, deal with it. He's a cranky fellow, but he's very useful for giving you tips, as in help. Yeah, he's a fun guy. I like to have him about. I used to keep the Game Boy Advance SP, the flip open one, in my pocket or in my glove box in my car. It's just nice to know that it was there if I ever got bored somewhere and I just need to pass some time. Other people read books. I played Zelda. So Minish Cap had a whole new thing to Zelda, and that was the miniature world. So with the help of this cap, you could shrink down to the size of an ant, and you could wander around Hyrule, and that was very appealing and very fascinating, and it expanded the world greatly. You could see things from a whole different perspective, and it gave you a lot more complexity in terms of your problem solving in things you'd have to deal with along the way. For instance, this is a caterpillar. It's nothing. You could accidentally kill one or just leave it be and it would make absolutely no difference to you in the big person world. But in this game, it could quite accidentally kill you, which is fun and a nice little twist. Also introduced some completely new gadgets like the gust jar, which could suck things in and fire them out. I don't think it's reappeared in any games since. I'd like to see it reappear at some point. It's a nice little thing. So here you go, you suck these webs in and away you go, you're free. So again, with the hole being small, suddenly a very mundane everyday enemy like a jelly chew, there he is, try and defeat that when you're the size of an ant, suddenly very complicated and you have to absorb all his jelly and then beat him to death and try not to get crushed in the meantime. So it was a very fun mechanic, this, having a tier 1 baddie as a dungeon boss. They do it a couple of times in the game actually. It's criticised for being a bit short, but I liked it. A year afterwards, in 2006, Twilight Princess was released. This was a launch title on the Wii, and it was also released on the GameCube, which it was originally meant to be just a GameCube game, but schedules are what they are, and a lot of the game was developed around mapping the various weapons, sword, shield, arrow, bow and all that, to use the Wiimote. Now, here's the thing. The Wiimote is meant to be held in the right hand, and the nunchuck, which controls your shield, is meant to be held in the left hand. There's no way of configuring that, that's the way it's fixed. Link in every game to date has been left-handed. So, Link suddenly had to be right-handed, and the game was nearly finished, so what did they do? They mirrored the game. What we're seeing is a mirror image of the original game, because that was the only way to fix it quickly enough to launch it. So, because reasons, Link is now right-handed, but if you get the GameCube version, he's left-handed, as he always was. It's absolutely mad. The story's set 100 years after Ocarina of Time. It's a different Link, but you do bump into the Link from Ocarina of Time in the form of a skeleton warrior who passes down your skills. So Link becomes this extraordinary warrior very quickly. When the story starts out, you leave the village of Ordon to deliver a sword. Sounds familiar if you've just played Minish Cap. But you get transported into the Twilight Realm and turned into a wolf. And you get rescued by a little imp called Midna. The idea for the wolf actually came to the director of the game, E.G. Unuma, in a dream. He had this nightmare where he was stuck in a wolf form, and it just ended up becoming one of the founding features of the entire game. Originally it was going to be a direct sequel to The Wind Waker. Same graphical style, same storyline, same world, same characters, but there was so many critical reviews about that. People didn't want more of that, they wanted something a bit more grown up. So they started this game with all of the children of the village being kidnapped and the world being turned to darkness. It took me a little bit of getting used to want to play this game because it was a bit scarier and darker than the previous installation, but I could see why they went that way. If you want to pick up a copy of this, it's not currently available on the Switch. The most recent version is the Wii U version, and you can pay up to 85 quid for that. It's not a cheap game, but the Wii version, 6 quid. Another year and we have another Zelda game. In 2007, Phantom Hourglass was released on the DS. It's a direct sequel to Wind Waker, as you can tell by the appearance of Toon Link again. And in this game, we're following along pretty much from where Wind Waker finished off, with Link joining the pirates, adventuring the open seas. And this time they're tracking down a ghost ship. That's where things start to go wrong. Now what this game does really well is it makes excellent use of the touchscreen on the DS. So every single aspect of the game is controlled through the touchscreen. You move your character, you use your items, you interact with people, you make notes on your map. And all of these things work absolutely wonderfully. problem is, if you don't click with that, you find this game utterly insufferable because there's no other way to control it. You've got all these buttons on the DS that you can see, but none of them do anything. But if you like it, it's fine, it's great, it works, it's really good. I wish more DS games had this control feature, it works so very well. So, you've got a fairy companion again. This time her name's Celia, and she's both your guide and your pointer. So where you touch on the map, that's where she appears and circles around you the rest of the time. There she is. And we introduce a new character called Linebeck. He's a cowardly sea captain who's in search of treasure, and he'll ultimately team up with you and help you track down the ghost ship because he thinks there's treasure on it. Now, because this was released on the DS and it made extensive use of the DS controls, it's kind of difficult to port it to another console. It was re-released on the Wii U, but I imagine you'd have to use the handheld console in your hand for the touchscreen stuff, and either press a button to switch between screens or have the TV screen as the top screen, and that'd be the only way to work it. But yeah, I don't see this being re-released anytime soon. It's a one and done, sadly. So if you can get hold of it, good luck to you. It's a really fun game if you can get used to the controls. They're really intuitive after a while. It had this whole thing of Phantom Guardians, these massive armoured things, a bit like the Dark Nuts in the earlier games, but they were virtually invulnerable. Link couldn't do a damn thing about them. You could hit them on the back and stun them, but most of the time you have to get out of their way. And as you progress into the game, you can get Zelda, Tetra, to control them, which is fun, and you get this whole new aspect of the game. Go forward a couple of years and you get the Spirit Tracks, released in 2009. It was supposed to be released a little bit sooner, but the development took longer than planned. Originally they were planning to just recycle the Phantom Hourglass game engine, but it kind of grew and became its own thing, and all these extra features took extra time. One of the things they wanted to do was have you design your own tracks. Oh, by the way, there are trains in this game, yeah. So the story starts 100 years after Phantom Hourglass, and New Link is qualifying to be a train engineer. There he is. And he can drive trains across these Spirit Tracks which cover New Hyrule. And it turns out that the Spirit Tracks are actually chains holding back the Demon King Maladus. Now, things go wrong very quickly, because Zelda, who you can also control in this game, she does play a very active part for a change, and she gets killed, and the Demon King is going to possess her body and destroy the world. Here he comes now. Fantastic looking fella, isn't he? He's a giant angry locomotive with eyes of fire. It's fantastic. So, like I said, Zelda plays a more active role. She can control the Phantom Guardians again. I think she did it last time. But the story gets a bit more fun. Her dialogue and her whole reaction to this situation it's very entertaining to watch. But she becomes more of a presence in the game, if you will. Yeah. So the train can also be used to transport cargo and passengers, and they'll either fall off or yell at you if you drive too badly. It's quite amusing little side quests that turn up from time to time. There's also a pan flute, which I despise more than anything else in any Zelda game before or since, because it requires you to have a very, very small amount of musical talent, which I lack entirely. So I had to get my wife to finish those bits for me. You cannot progress through the game unless you can pass the musical tests in the game, and I couldn't. For love nor money, I tried and tried. You have to blow into the mic, use the stylus and the... it was awful. It was awful. You do get upgrades to your train throughout the game as well. This is the Spirit Train, and you can have like a candy train and a ghost train and all kinds of fun stuff. It basically does nothing. You get a little bit more health here and again, but yeah, it's very comical, very fun little game. You get to play with trains a lot. I very much approve. 2011 was the 25th anniversary of Nintendo's Zelda franchise, and they gave us a Skyward Sword on the Wii, a game that overall feels a little short, but with plenty of artificially long sections, in particular a talking sword spirit called Fee, who despite claiming to be an advanced piece of software, speaks with all the urgency of a sloth deciding which tie to wear to work today at the DMV. It was re-released in 2021 on the Switch with mercifully skippable dialogue and the option to forego the previously mandatory motion control action sequences, but the undeserved sense of grandeur persists. Link lives in a military commune on a floating island in the sky and has just graduated to fly his enormous magic bird. The bird can take you anywhere in the sky to one of 2 or even 3 much smaller islands featuring little of interest because of reasons you can't visit the surface world until Zelda falls into it, and then you have to go after her because the rest of the Knight Academy are too busy with the Sisyphean task of cleaning out their horse-sized bird's aviary. The heavy focus on motion control aspect of the game centres mainly around the use of the sword. For the full experience, this is best played on a big TV in a living room with plenty of space around you, but the curtains firmly drawn. Sorry, I have a lot of feelings about this game. It does have some good points, such as these fellas here and the very animated characters like this Moblin I'm about to go and put an end to. So you have to physically wave the sword around in order to do damage, and it takes bits of damage off him. You can see it relates directly to what your thing actually does, but once you get his shield down, he's not all that. Well, I'm not sure if he's safe for work. Oh, and the desert area had this fascinating time stone thing where within a certain radius of these time crystals you could revert time back several hundred years, and the environment would change and objects would suddenly come to life. It was a fun little mechanic. There were a couple of new objects, or should I say old objects that have been rendered in 3D for the first time. I seem to distinctly remember saying that it would be nice to see the Gust Jar again, and here it is. It seems ungainly and enormous, but it does have some fun uses from time to time. There we go, some little critters hiding in these things. They really don't like having a blast of hot air shot at them. So what's the other item? We've got the whip, which I'm not sure if this has appeared in the game. It's very Indiana Jones of it, and I like it. Ah, Girahim. Now, Girahim I liked. He's the antagonist for much of the game, although he doesn't really count you as his equal, and it's funny the way he talks to you. He really stands out as a personality in the franchise. However, the motion control boss battles with him are an absolute nightmare and took me ages to finish. 22 years after A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds comes out on 3DS. Link is training as a blacksmith in the familiar nostalgic Hyrule we saw in Link to the Past back on the SNES. It seems like a pretty normal Zelda game at first, but the whole game is turned on its head when a character called Yuga starts turning people into paintings, including Link. Luckily, he's wearing a magic bracelet that allows him to move in the 2D world, which opens up whole new areas of the 3D world. Playing this on the 3DS, this game truly stretches the limit of the player's perception and frequently reminds you to take a break, which is a very good thing because it hurt my brain in so many ways, and it expanded on an existing world, and for want of using a common parlance, it added a whole new dimension to the game. Now, one of the biggest differences is the way the dungeons work. So you go to the same dungeon you saw in the original game, but you can go to the dungeon in any order you like. You don't have to do dungeon 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order, get the hookshot, get the arrows, get all that, because of this new rental system that's invented. So it's revealed later on in the game who the person renting the game's out, and it's quite amusing, and it ties in with the whole light world, dark world thing. There's also a very long form fetch quest which rewards you with permanent upgrades, and it does add a whole new dimension to... I said it again. It adds a whole new bit of content to the game that gives it a lot of replayability, and lets you come back to it and say, oh, I've only got 99% of this game done, I need to finish that. It scratches that itch, you know. One really disappointing thing is that unlike previous DS, 3DS installations, it makes very, very poor use of the touchscreen mechanic. There's no more of this controlling Link using the touchscreen. That's gone. You're just using the joypad stick thingy and the buttons, and the bottom screen is reduced to nothing most of the time. I mean, in every cutscene it just goes blank, but the rest of the time it's either a map or a menu system, and I think that's just really poor. I mean, it's got a lot going on. Like I said before, you're working in so many dimensions at once, you occasionally have to stop, close your eyes and rest in a dark room. Remember, this is using the 3D perspective effect that was unique to the 3DS in full colour with no glasses. It hurt my brain a lot to play this game for a long time, so I didn't. So in some ways it's good they did away with that, and in other ways it's poor. After 5 years in development, Breath of the Wild was released on the Wii U and again on the Switch in 2017. A whole 2 years late, but that was time well spent making one of the greatest games of all time. Breath of the Wild is set in a large open world version of Hyrule with hundreds of small dungeons known as shrines scattered throughout, and Link's on a quest to recover his lost memory and restore Hyrule. This game gives the most freedom of any Zelda game to date, with a surprising departure from previous games relying on special items to unlock unique locations. The graphical style is a stunning blend of realism and cartoon-like shading, with the first example of fully voiced actors in the series, but you still do have to do plenty of reading. 2023 we saw the release of Tears of the Kingdom. It recycled the same world, characters and gameplay, and it's often referred to as the Gandalf the White compared to Breath of the Wild's Gandalf the Grey. It's Breath of the Wild as it should have been, and it took another 6 years to develop it, and this time it went a whole year over its due date, but it was worth it yet again. Tears of the Kingdom improved on many of the gameplay mechanics in its predecessor, expanded the world by adding a sky and underground area, and it developed the characters and massively expanded the capabilities of the physics engine. The player can now create incredibly complex contraptions and vehicles to solve puzzles, defeat enemies, or just plain have fun. It was fantastic. And there we have it, all of the Zelda games. Well, apart from Age of Calamity, Triforce Heroes, Hyrule Warriors, Four Swords Adventures, Cadence of Hyrule, Game & Watch, Broadcast System, Ancient Stone Tablets, Navi's Trackers, Link's Crossbow Training, Battle Quest Faces of Evil, Wand of Gamelon, Zelda's Adventure, Tingle's Rosy Rupaland, Tingle's Balloon Trip of Love, Tingle's Balloon Flight, and Too Much Tingle. If you have been, thank you for watching. I've been Wolverine. This has been the 100th episode of my Zelda Let's Play series. I hope you've enjoyed this review of most of the Zelda games, and I shall see you next time. Tatty bye.